This podcast is powered by the Mitt TV of Romeo, Michigan. If you're looking to start a podcast for your business or personal use, look no further than the Mitt TV. Their in-studio podcast experience allows you to record perfect audio and capture amazing video. That's all right here at the Mitt TV podcast studio in Romeo, Michigan. Contact them now via email for a free consultation and to schedule a studio visit at mitt.tvpodcast@gmail.com. We're talking to Jason Smith tonight in our program called Get to Know Your Candidates. And Jason, we have a lot of interest this time of year with people wanting to know who the candidates are because we're all really busy and we don't have time to even know how many board members are on our district board and what they do, why they're there, until we have a child or a student, enrolled or some other issue with the district. So we like to get to know you a little bit better just by, talking about a little bit about how long you've been here and what your interests are and your family and all that.
Sure. My name is Jason Smith. My wife and I moved to this area 11 years ago. So I grew up in Harrison Township. My wife grew up in Memphis, which is not far from Romeo. We were kind of looking for a spot that worked for us both professionally, because at the time I was working in Auburn Hills. My wife was working in Troy. And I've always liked the area, particularly in the fall, because as we all know, Romeo and the surrounding areas it's beautiful that time of year. So it was, I think, in the late spring, we started driving around one day and we said, you know what, we'd like to live out here. It's beautiful. We like the area. And in particularly the schools we thought were, from what we knew of them, very, very good schools. Didn't have kids yet. We'd just gotten married. So we said, well, if that's what we decide to do, we'll consider that. And we moved out in 2013 and we've been in love with the area ever since. Since then, we've got 2 daughters, both of whom are in Romeo schools.
Oh, and that's nice planning.
It is, yeah. So my wife found out she was pregnant less than a year after we moved in.
Okay.
And we live relatively close to one of the elementary schools. We're close to the high school. We both work very close to the area. We're in the area, actually. So it's become our home and where we live, where we spend our time. And it's wonderful.
You must have a pretty young family, too.
My oldest is 10. My youngest is 7. So.
Okay.
Yep.
With that kind of young family and your job, and everything else that you have to do, what made you take your extra time and apply for a position like that on the board?
Yeah. So like I said, the schools are fantastic. And I noticed that there were 3 seats open this time around, 2 of whom weren't running again. And I said to myself, well, I want to get involved in the schools on some level. My daughters do activities that I can't coach. They both dance. I'm not a dancer, right?
Okay.
They swim, which I could swim maybe to save my life, but I'm not, a swimmer that can coach people very well.
Sure.
So I said, well, I want to get involved and I want to keep the schools as good as they have been, right? And so I said, well, as a dad of 2 young people in the district, let's take a look at this. So I looked into it, discussed it with my wife and said, you know what, I think this would be a really cool opportunity to give back to the community while being involved in a meaningful way with my kids and their education.
Right. Have you ever been involved in the schools or the Board of Education before?
A little bit. We paid attention to it 2 years ago. I tried to see what was going on with who was running and what the issues were, because again, my daughter at the time was relatively young. So a lot of the elementary type topics that were coming up, we hadn't heard much about of, this Board of Education and related topics.
Right.
So we paid attention and we tried to get involved when we could. And this time around, it made sense because I said, okay, there's 2 open seats. Let's get involved in some way we can and hopefully continue the legacy of Romeo Community Schools.
Wonderful. So have you gone to the meetings or do you watch the meetings? Do you have any idea of what the makeup is and the characters and the kind of things that they deal with?
Yep, somewhat. So I shouldn't say somewhat. I watch all of them and I attend the ones that I can. So up until recently, we've had...
Do you watch them on the Mitt?
I do. Yeah. I love the Mitt, actually. I watch it every chance I can get because there's a lot of really good stuff out there, particularly related to the community, which I think is great. But, I join when I can. Up
Mhm.
until this year, we had a pretty busy activity schedule with our kids, so I would tune in afterwards a lot of times. This year, we've tried to move that around a little bit, and a lot of the reason for that was because I am running, and so I
Mhm.
want to make sure I don't have any, obstructions to my schedule so that I can commit to it.
Right.
If and when I get elected, and even if I don't, I'm going to commit to being more active now, especially because my kids are getting older and these topics are going to become more and more relevant, right? But I
Right.
do appreciate the fact that they are recorded because that gives an opportunity not to just listen to them, but to listen back, things you might have missed, clarify any open points. I think it's wonderful. So,
Right. Boy, you just answered my two next
did I?
questions. You're good. Like one of the questions that I was going to ask is, if you do watch the meetings and you see the fact that you're going to have to work with a board and work
Mhm.
with other people that have different opinions, and we got a buzzword critical thinking,
Mhm.
kind of a buzzword, and trending lately. And how do you see yourself and your skills? What skills do you have that ready you to deal with difference of opinions and possibly talking to another board member that has a difference of opinion, swaying them,
Mhm.
swaying the vote?
Sure. Let me first say I think difference of opinion are great.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you agree with somebody every single, time you discuss something, you're not discussing it in a way that is constructive, right? I know a lot of people who I agree with on almost everything. You can find something that you can disagree on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I work in business, you work in business,
Right.
right? There's going to be disagreements. And that's, I think, just fundamental to human nature. I think the important thing is to acknowledge those differences, but to also acknowledge the importance of getting the job done, whatever that
Right.
job is, right? So I can say in my professional experience, there have been a lot of agreements, but a lot of disagreements. But the mission remains the same. You
Mm-hmm.
have to execute the task that you're given, right? So as a board member, I am appreciative that there are differences of opinion because I can learn from those differences of opinion. I might come into a meeting and say, you know what, I think I've got the right idea here, but somebody could talk to me in a way that says, you know what, look at it this way. And it might be a perspective I hadn't considered before. When that happens, I think you're forced to kind of re examine your own view in the context of this new information
Mm-hmm.
and to make a decision that ultimately not just agrees with your view, because my view might not be what's best for the community as well, right?
Right.
And so I think you have to take that approach, have an open mind, have a discussion constructively with people, even though you differ, to make
Mm-hmm.
the right decision for the group that you're representing.
Right. So, have you been watching the meetings? Did you watch last month's meeting
I did.
where our district and Todd Robinson got some pretty good reports?
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a good job.
They are.
And they've lived especially the last 4 years, especially having to live through and manage our district, our
Mm-hmm.
students, our teachers, the admins through COVID. What do you see in watching them? What do you see that you could improve on, if anything?
I mean,
We're not saying they're perfect,
sure, right. I think improvement is kind of a difficult word to define.
Yeah.
I would say in general, I think as long as the school is executing and doing what is expected of the school. So I think the expectation has to be set. And if they're meeting the standards that are set by the state,
Mm-hmm.
by parents, and they're meeting those goals, I would say that's successful. Of course, there's going to be different viewpoints on what success is, right?
Sure.
So I think it's important to come in with an expectation that is reasonable. But I also think improvement, back to your original question, is more along the lines of how can we just keep things going the way that they are. So I don't want to necessarily say I see an opportunity for improvement, but that's from looking at it as an outsider, right? Once, if I get elected, if I get to the position where I can review and see what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
I might have more specific opportunities for improvement. But I think looking at it right now, like you said during the last meeting, things are going pretty well.
Right.
I'm very happy to see that. And that's really kind of my goal, is to continue that, right? Because there
Mm-hmm.
are two
Sure.
open seats. And I feel like with my experience and with my background, I can contribute in a way that will continue that legacy.
So, were you involved at all during the COVID? Were you guys here yet? Did you watch
We
what they
were.
had to go through?
I did. Yep.
And they championed, a lot of issues that were being brought upon them by the federal government, by the state, by opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a difficult time. And I think they did a great job personally.
Mm-hmm.
But, you look at those issues, and as a parent, what do you feel that the percentage of responsibility is to govern your children, to teach your children, to educate your children, with the degree of decisions being the parents or the school system?
I'll tell you how we handled it in my house, right? So we took opinions and things that were presented to us as facts, and we looked at what made sense for our family,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think in most cases, that's typically how things should be viewed, right? Because there's not a one size fits all. There are some families who certainly have a much lower risk tolerance than others, and there are families who have very low risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it makes sense for each family to kind of look at that as a unit and to make the best determination that they think works for them. That said, I think there's also a responsibility, though, to not put others into harm's way. So I
Mm-hmm.
think in cases where, say, you have a sickness and rather than showing up to school, you opt to stay home, I think that's a personal responsibility, but it's also a benefit to the community because if I have a fever and I come in and I talk to you, Ruth, right,
Right.
I would feel I'm not doing a service to anybody by doing that. So
Yeah. Well,
I think
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think you just kind of have to balance it, right? I think you have to look at what makes sense. So for my family, we decided we're going to mitigate the risk as much as we can, but we're also priority number one for us was for our kids to be in school.
Mm-hmm.
When COVID happened, I had a 5-year-old in kindergarten and a 2-year-old in preschool. My wife and I
Wow.
both work, and at the time we were from home, right? And so we did what we could. We managed, we adapted, but at the minute we could send them to school, we made a decision as a family that we were going to mitigate the risk in a way that makes sense while ensuring that they were able to go to the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the original question, I'm sorry if I deviated from it
No,
a
no,
little bit,
you've answered it.
was what makes sense. I think
Mm-hmm.
the board did a great job. I think they found ways to kind of balance the needs of the community as well as the needs of families. And I think looking at it 4 years later, 5 years later, whatever it is, I think it worked probably in the best way that it could have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Given what we had to deal with at the time.
Sure. And what we knew then. I mean, it was
Exactly.
just there was so much based on fear, and parents didn't, I mean, they get some people, most parents will kill for their children, I
Mhm.
mean, and now now that we know what we know, say we went through another pandemic,
Mhm.
would you agree with the vaccinations, the masks, and everything that went down?
I mean, I guess I don't fully understand the question, but I'll just say in general, I think.
Now that there has been some more education,
Oh, yeah, sure.
from the pandemic, what
Mhm.
the effects are. We had a lot of um, controversy about masking, no masking, in class, out, at home, all of that.
Mhm.
But now that we know more in 4 years, I
Sure.
don't know if we know that much more,
Right.
but, and who knows what's coming at us
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
But, where would you stand with that?
I think it would depend on what the recommendations are from everybody, right? So I
Hmm.
would listen to first the educators to see what they think is best in terms of in person versus not. I think we can look at what happened in terms of people having to be at home, and we can see that as it was a negative in some ways because I can tell you, as the father of 2 young daughters and a wife who works full time, it was very difficult to give the level of education that was needed
Yeah.
while you're at home. They did what they could, teachers did what they could, administrators did what they could given the information that they had. I think that's the approach that you have to take. Not that you have to
Hmm.
stay home, but you have to take the information and make the best determination. And I
Right.
think if it was an exact same scenario where COVID came back and it was the same thing, I think most people would agree that we would do things a little bit differently because we know now, right?
Right.
But I think if something brand new comes along, I think then again, you have to kind of rehash the decision making process. And
Hmm.
I think it should be a mixture, like I said. I think the educators can give the recommendation in terms of what works best for not just them, but for children.
Hmm.
I think medical professionals should give their information at least as much as they can. And then it's ultimately up to the decision makers to say, okay, we have to balance all of these things and look at it from a viewpoint that gives as much of a chance for everybody to be healthy and successful as possible, right? So,
Sure.
like I said, originally, I feel like what happened, particularly in Romeo, eventually worked out the best way it probably could have, right?
Hmm.
But unless it's the exact same scenario, I don't know that I can definitively say we would do exactly what we did before or that we would do something drastically different because we don't know what's coming
Right.
next, right?
Yeah.
But I will say,
Hopefully
knowing,
nothing.
right, exactly. But knowing what we know now, I think everybody would agree a lot different decisions would have been made for sure.
Yeah. And do you feel that when you have to go um, at home learning, that the at home learning system in our district is a good one?
Sure. I think, again, when it first started, I had a kindergartner. So I don't know
Yeah,
what it was like for the middle and high schoolers. I can say, I mean, asynchronistic learning for kids was difficult because there wasn't a set time.
especially that age too.
Yep. The next
And
year,
the
though,
mask, you can't see someone's expression.
yeah,
You can't read like you read with your parents,
yep.
when they're happy, when they're sad.
Hmm.
They said that was the most difficult between kindergarten and third grade,
Hmm.
for that point of time where everybody was masked and quiet, really. You couldn't see anyone's expression.
Yeah, I mean, I will say being at home and learning once they were able to kind of have it be a camera situation, I think was much
Hmm.
better. But of course, preferred for my family was being in school because I think we mitigated the risk as much as we could for our family. We made sure we stayed on top of hand washing and things like that.
Hmm.
So it was important to us to make sure our priority was to have them in school. But again, I think every family is different. If there are children who have certain conditions that prevent them from
Sure.
doing so, I think that's a personal choice for that family. They need to
Hmm.
make that, right? But I will say that online learning, at least as much as they could when they did it, from my experience, was much less effective than being in person. But that's not to say it was bad. When
Right.
it happened, I think that's all we could really do,
I
right?
think pretty much everybody has said that,
Hmm.
parents and teachers
Yep.
alike,
Yep.
that it's got to be, per person
Yep.
who decides on their own.
Hmm.
And then if it doesn't work, try something else.
Sure.
So maybe get back to school or come home.
Hmm.
So we're trying to, you know, navigate through a very difficult time.
Hmm.
And during difficult times, I know you've seen the fear,
Hmm.
the fear base. And another one of the issues that I watched come into drama situations is the talk about bathrooms.
Hmm.
Um, and in my education, I'm in the schools quite a bit. Um, there are three bathrooms. There's, a girl's bathroom, boy bathroom, and a spare bathroom. Where do you stand if that topic comes back up as far as having a specific bathroom for transgender girls and boys?
I mean, I guess the question is there going to be somebody monitoring bathroom use, right?
Mhm.
I think that's the question, right?
Right.
Um, so I think that's a question you have to look at from
Because
a,
that's what it would take if you
for
had
sure. Yep.
three different ones.
Yep. I think it's, a little bit out of the scope of a school board. I don't know that those decisions can be made. So I think that's a topic that would have to be made on a case by case basis, I think,
Hmm.
right? So I think if there's a situation where a person feels a certain way about going to the bathroom, I think that has to be handled on a case by case. I don't know that there's a definitive one size fits all answer for that because I
Hmm.
think there are laws basically governing that kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
And I don't know that it's something that a school board member singularly has the ability to make that decision on, right? So I would say you'd have to defer to the applicable laws. You would have to look at if there's a policy in place at the district, what does that policy mean? How do we apply it? And what influence realistically does the school board have?
Sure. So today, in our students' world and parents' world, they deal with not the same things that we dealt
Mm-hmm.
with. We left school, we came home, there was a phone on the wall with a cord that was only used for adults,
Mm-hmm.
and we had an opportunity to disconnect
Mm-hmm.
and be with our families and do our homework and have a nice restful sleep and get up in the morning and go to school.
Mm-hmm.
With all of the social media, and which you have young kids, but
Mm-hmm.
you they want to take their phones to bed. If you're a teenager, there's so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that affecting as far as the way that children and the district learn and react differently now?
I mean, my daughter's 10. She has no social media. She doesn't have a
Good.
phone. We're pretty strict on that.
Mm-hmm.
There are other people who've chosen a different path for their child, and that's their choice, and I respect that. But for me, I think there is a very unhealthy relationship with social media in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will
In
say that,
media in general.
and I
Yeah.
will say, generally speaking, I don't know that there is much positive that comes from that as far as children go. Their brains are still forming, the
Mhm.
relationships are still forming. And I can tell you as a kid, right? If you were bullied, and I have been bullied in the
Yeah,
past, right? It was great when you got home because you were away from those people, right?
exactly.
You
Right.
had a 12, 13, 14-hour break, you got up, okay, you had to deal with it again, but you got that break.
Right.
This
You got the
doesn't
love
allow
of your
that.
family, you got
Yep.
some rest. You didn't have to watch it in the middle of the night, them still talking about you.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think in general, it's a decision that has to be made by families individually. Of
Hmm.
course, I don't know that there's something I can say that would, you know, be a one size fits all, right? But I will say in general, my family, and I think a lot of families that we tend to hang out with have made a decision of they're too young, at least right
Yeah.
now, at least for a 10-year-old, right?
Yeah.
That's not to say in a few years that decision changes a little bit to say, okay, there's going to be restrictions. We're going to monitor it very heavily. You know, I
Hmm.
have a very close friend of mine who's a police officer in Warren, Michigan, and he was involved with some of the, crimes against children and things like that.
Sure.
And some of the things he told me terrified me to the point where I'm very uncomfortable with my
Hmm.
10-year-old being on an internet unsupervised. So we're
Right.
very, very careful with what we do, and we're very careful with their exposure to people or to things that we don't know,
Hmm.
right? And then again, back to your point about bullying, I don't think it's healthy to constantly be plugged in, right? I
Yeah.
think you need to have that disconnect. I try to do it myself. I'm not always great about
I
it, but
know.
it's just
It's a
kind of,
wonderful thing
it is when
to
you
get away
can,
from
right?
it,
It
right?
is.
It's like a
So
vacation.
for
I feel
sure.
like I've been on the beach for 10 days, with one
Right.
day away from it.
Exactly.
And we kind of have that mindset here too. We don't spend a lot of time on social media listening to all of the rumors and all of that, but we do appreciate what you guys do when you take on a position like this and you're running for a position. Social media is the same thing.
Hmm.
You're being put out there and you're seeing negative misinformation, negative comments and things like that. Is there anything that you would like to talk about or debunk in that world
Not
as you
particularly.
go forward?
I try to not pay attention to the noise,
Hmm.
right? I hear rumblings of things occasionally, and I work full time. My wife works full time. I have two young daughters, right? I have to teach them to unplug and disengage,
Hmm.
and I have to do that somewhat by example, right? So if and when I hear something, I try to shrug it off because I know 9 times out of 10 it's somebody who doesn't know me, because if they knew me better, they'd find something better to say about me than what they already did,
Yeah,
right?
they go deeper.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I think in general, if you have heard anything about me, give me a call, reach
Right.
out to me. If you have a question about a topic or you disagree, I'm an open book, right? I don't have any issues with discussing difficult topics, right? So you asked me about my hobbies. One of my hobbies is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? So my friends and I get together in a room and we try to beat each other up.
Oh,
You
I
know what?
love that.
And
I was in Brazil and I fell in love with it. And
it's
I did
fun.
it for quite a while.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's
but
very good
you
exercise.
understand it is. It's great
Right.
exercise, but when you're with that person, you're literally trying to hurt each other. At
Hmm.
least,
Make it look like that.
you are, right? But
Just missing.
right, exactly. But there's a very important, I think, lesson in that to say you can do these things, you can spar, you
Hmm.
can disagree, and you can do it in a way that's constructive. So anytime I go to my jujitsu class, and let's say it's a day I just get beat up by somebody,
Hmm.
right? I don't get upset. I don't get angry. I say, you know what? I'm going to learn next time what I did wrong and how to do it better, right? And
Exactly.
I think that's what I want to say generally about this too, right?
Hmm.
Somebody has an issue with something I say, or if they disagree with something, let's talk about it,
Right.
regardless of whether I'm on the board or not, right? And my hope is that anybody running for a position like this has a similar view, because
Hmm.
I think at the end of the day, whether I get on the board or any of the other, I get 6 candidates, 7 total,
Sylvan.
right?
Yeah.
I would hope that I could call them and say, hey, you know what? I have a question about this topic. How you're handling it. Let's talk about it. We can disagree, but we can disagree in a way that's constructive. And I might even learn something, or they might learn something,
Right.
maybe not from me, but you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
might learn something from them, right? So,
Right.
but I think that's hopefully what happens, right? And
So if
so
somebody wants to get a hold of you, how open are you?
just send an email to my email address.
Can you give your points of contact
Sure.
to the viewers?
Yeah, I'll just, my email address is fine, ctejasonsmith@gmail.com. That's my committee email address.
Okay. And do
And
you have a
then
website?
I don't. We have a
Okay.
Facebook page.
Great. What's the
I'm
name of that?
running as a slate with Christy Seitz, I think
Okay.
is probably well known. She and I have a Facebook page and a Facebook group. I messed up the Facebook group when I set it up and I did it as private, so I apologize for that. But
Oh,
the page itself is public, but you can certainly request to join the group and we will be more than happy to engage. But send a note to either one of us and we'll be happy to discuss and to talk and to learn from each other.
now do you have your own Facebook page that people could PM you with questions?
My email address is my own
Okay,
email
just your
address. Yep.
email.
Send an
Good.
email to me and we can discuss. And if it makes sense, we can meet for a coffee down at
Sure.
Main Street, which I think we all know and love.
Yeah.
And it'd be
Yes,
nice to
absolutely.
get to know some people. So I think
Good.
that's absolutely 100% something I'm willing to do.
Wonderful. So if you were to talk to your viewers and your voters come November 5th,
hmm
why should they vote for you?
I think in general, I'm a dad with two girls who lived through a pandemic like we all did and who's going to listen to the community, right? I think we all have our preconceived notions of what people feel or what they are, or maybe how I look, right? But at the end of
You
the
look
day,
pretty normal.
I, you know, um, but I think in general, no, you're good. But I think in general, it's just we're all part of the same community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna maybe see things differently, but I'm gonna learn from everybody, and I'm gonna look at things from a holistic standpoint. I'm not gonna stick to a certain viewpoint because it's my viewpoint. I'm gonna stick to a viewpoint if it makes sense, right? And I'm gonna take that attitude to the board. So I've got extensive experience in the automotive industry. I've worked as a program and as a project manager. I understand how these things go. I understand there's a job we need to execute, and I understand that there are going to be disagreements or there's going to be agreements. We might agree unanimously on something, but at the end of the day, making Romeo Schools or keeping Romeo Schools, the wonderful district that it
Mm-hmm.
is top priority for me. It's tied to our property values, it's tied to our children's future, and it's tied to the greatness of the community, right?
Right.
And so I think in general, what we've tried to do as a slate is to try to ensure that kids are positioned to be successful, right? So we've sought a lot of union endorsements to make sure that we have partnerships with them so that when kids graduate from high school, they have different pathways. So when I was coming up, everyone basically made it sound like if you didn't go to college, you weren't going to have a good job, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people heard that. We've
Not
discovered over
wrong.
the years, yeah, we've discovered over the years, it's not the case, right? And there are people who are they're doing fantastic, but there wasn't enough of that,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my high school,
Yep.
for us to be there. So I think the academies at Romeo have done a fantastic job, and our hope is with the endorsements we've sought out,
Mm-hmm.
which include the Painters Union, the IUPAT, we've got the MRCC, the UAW Region 1, we've reached out to the REA, we've got all of those. They can come in and give these students viable options for when they graduate, should they choose something other than college. And our goal is to kind of partner with them a little bit so that kids will realize I can get the equivalent of an apprenticeship in high school
Right.
and then start making
Oh, yeah.
fantastic money, right?
Yeah. We're one of the founding mothers slash fathers of the academies.
And I think it's great.
Been working with them for 12, 13 years.
And it's wonderful.
It has really worked out well for our students. And I mean, we have one here. He's 24 years old and he's an executive director and running a business.
And
And
what a
he
selling point.
graduated, right?
What a
Exactly.
selling point when you can tell, not, of course, you can go to whatever college you're able to get into, but if college isn't what you want to do, or if you want to get into the trades, there are partnerships,
Yeah.
ideally, with these different trades that will get you into these roles
And have a
that will
great
set
life.
you up. Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're fantastic jobs. They pay well. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's one of the big things I want to make sure everybody understands is that's a big thing for me because, like I said, growing up, it was always sold as something that, you want to go to college, you want to do this, and there wasn't as much emphasis on things. And now we see the deficit in the everyday life, right? We see
Student loans,
there's,
everything.
yep,
It's
and there's not
just-
enough of the trades. We're short on electricians, we're short on plumbers, all
Yeah.
these things, right? So to encourage that and to make sure that people realize there are real fantastic opportunities to do this, to have these unions come in and to say, hey, I'm a guy who graduated 5 years ago and look at what I'm doing now. Look at what the life I've built doing this. I think it's wonderful. So that's been one of our top priorities is to expand that. So
Well, wonderful. And you've been very educational. And we thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Jason,
I
for
appreciate it.
coming into our program and talking a little bit about yourself and what you're going to bring to the table on November 5th to
Thank
our
you.
Board of Education.
Thank you. I appreciate the
Thank you.
conversation. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.